No, it's just an advertisement, Hannah.
Okay.
It's from Medford. But, you know, there was a tremendous amount of people that used to fish through the ice on Lake Chickway. And that was before the warnings of the lead in the fish in the lake went up years ago. I mean, when we were playing hockey on Stevie Pond or Lake Chickway, and we got thirsty, we would just go over to a hole that one of the ice fishermen had made, and we'd get down on our hands and knees and we'd drink out of the lake. I mean, nobody thought twice about it. And it was just what everybody did. The girls were a little bit more dainty than the boys were, but the boys would just drop down on their knees and
kiss the water,
drink away with great cold water.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, but and there was a lot of respect for the lake naturally from the people of North Andover. The people of North Andover have never, as far as my years living in this town, they've never disrespected the lake. They've always had a very keen, thoughtful process of using the lake. There's always been fishermen fishing on the lake. There's always been boaters on the lake. In fact, in 1930, I want to say 1938, 39, and 40, there was a fleet of sailboats on Lake Chickway. And every Saturday and Sunday, usually Saturday they had time trials, and on Sunday they had races. And my cousin Austin Woolley and his wife Ruth had a sailboat on there, and I would go up and hang around up there, and then when they got done the time trials, they'd come in, and a lot of the kids, the young kids and the people that say, would you like to go for a ride? I said, sure. And they'd take us out in their sailboats, and we'd sail around Lake Chickway for a few minutes.
Where would they launch the sailboats
They
from?
were right there at the ice house.
At the
The
Treadwell's end.
The ice house would be on the left, and down below they had a beautiful dock area. They had a walkway, a gangway leading down to their
dock
in the lake.
Yeah.
They had rowboats that they could row out to their sailboats with, and it was just a wonderful time. And there was one man that had a speedboat on Lake Chickway. His name was Harry McPherson, and Harry McPherson lived on Lincoln Street. Harry McPherson worked as the groundskeeper up at Brooks School. He was the head groundskeeper for years. And Harry McPherson had put a powerboat on Lake Chickway years and years ago. And so when they restricted, Harry was grandfathered in. And Harry, every year, Harry would put his speedboat on Lake Chickway, and it was right there in front of the ice house, out in the cove, in that cove in there. And on Saturdays and Sundays, Harry would go up, and if somebody jumped out in their sailboat during one of the races or something, Harry would maneuver in and help them get righted and bail out their boat and get on their way. It was a great time. It was a great thing to watch out there all the time. But at that time, there were, let's see, 4 camps? There was the fireman's cabin, which nobody remembers, which was directly across from the ice house. And then there was the Rockwell camp, and there was the Jackson camp. And then there was the big Stevens camp, which was on the point. The Stevens camp, which originally was the North Andover Bicycle Club, which became the North Andover Country Club across the lake. And and those were the camps that were on the edge of Lake Chickway on that time. And North Andover at that period in time was dry, and so the firemen's camp, so to speak, and somebody once said to me, who owned the firemen's camp? And I said, who knows who owned the fireman's camp, and I don't know who built the fireman's camp. But that's where all of the men, of the older men of the day went to drink and play cards and play poker. And the only way over there was by boat. And the boat was
That's not the one that Charlie McCubbin lived in for a
no,
while.
that's the Jackson camp.
Okay.
Old man Jackson, Charlie Jackson was worked in Davison Ferber. He was a designer or a draftsman, I guess Charlie was. And Charlie's father had built that camp. He worked for Mr. Stevens, and had a good job for the Stevens mill. And he asked Mr. Stevens if he could build a camp, and Mr. Stevens told him, you can build a camp, but you can't buy the land. I won't give up the land. And so Charlie Jackson's father bought this camp. Charlie Jackson had it for years, and then he sold it to a man by the name of Bob Stewart, who lived on Lincoln Street. And Bob Stewart, I went to Bob Stewart one day and I said, Bob, if you ever want to sell that camp, let me know, will you? And he said, would you like to buy it? And I said, yeah, I'll do it. And so he called me and he said, Dave, I think I'm going to sell the camp. I had 3 children and was living on my salary from the police department, and I didn't have 2 nickels to rub together. So I called my friend Charlie McCubbin and said, Charlie, here's the story on the camp. Do you want to buy it? And he said, oh, boy, do I want to buy it. So Charlie McCubbin ended up owning that camp on the lake, and that's how he got it from through that whole line of individuals that had owned it. Charlie lived there. He separated from his wife at one point, and so he took up residence on
I remember that. He
Yeah.
had a car battery that would run a radio and a couple of lights.
yeah. He
Yeah.
had an outhouse in the woods,
Yeah.
and he got his water out of Lake Chigwich and brought it in the camp. There was no running water, no electricity in the camp. He would park his car up by Edward's farm and walk down to the camp in the wintertime because he couldn't make the road passable. In the winter, in the summertime, he could drive right down to the camp, but in the winter he couldn't.
My cousin Sean and I visited him one summer, went down to camp, and he showed us how he set up his living.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
that's-
He's a great
that's-
guy. Great
Yeah,
guy.
oh yeah,
I
very
worked for him
friendly.
for years in the police department. Yeah.
So is Sean Rockwell your cousin?
Yeah.
Oh, Sean
Yeah.
and I were in school together.
Oh yeah?
Yeah.
My mother, Caroline Rockwell Stevens, and was a bowling friend of your mom's.
Yes,
Yeah,
right.
They bowl together every week. Every week. They
Yeah, oh,
bowl.
my mom loved that. She
Yeah.
loved going to bowling.
And of course, your mother, your mother had a huge collection of beautiful wagons, and I first saw those wagons at the Stevens estate. There was a family by the name of Nelsons that lived up at the Stevens estate. And Mr. Nelson was the groundskeeper, and Mrs. Nelson was the cook for Mr. Knapp. And there were 3 children, Kyle, Ernie, and Ann. And Ernie Nelson was my friend, was in high school, went all through school with me, and on Saturdays, I would pack a lunch and I'd go up as a little kid and I'd get with Ernie and we'd go down to the farm. And at the farm on that time, there was a man by the name of Rudolph Mesley. And Mr. Mesley was the superintendent of the farm, and he was the boss, and he didn't want anybody in that area. And if Mr. Mesley didn't know you, he'd kick you, he'd tell you, please leave the property right away. And he'd make sure that you left the property right away. But with Ernie Nelson living on the property and at the big house, we call it the big house, and we could go all over the farm, and we did. We went in to the cow barns and talked to the hired men there was one wonderful, wonderful man. His name was Teddy Goodhue, and he was the head herdsman, and he lived on Osgood Street in a little cottage. And Teddy would show us all around the barns, and was so friendly. And then he would take us into the milk house and show us the milk house. And the strange part of it is that when my brother graduated from high school, and there was a period of time before he went in the service, that he ran the milk house at Edwards Farm, and he lived in the boarding house. And there was a huge boarding house at Edwards Farm, and most of the unmarried men that worked on the farm lived in the boarding house, as did my brother. My brother moved from my mother and father's house up into the boarding house because he had to get up every morning at 3:30, 4 o'clock in the morning, and he had to go out and get the milk house ready to accept the milk from the herdsmen when they were done milking. When they were done milking, they brought the milk right in, and my brother started to process it and started to bottle it to be taken out by the delivery men and delivered to the different houses around town.
That same day, the milk would be harvested and then processed and delivered the same day,
Yeah.
or the next day, or
Yeah, and they
Wow.
for a
fresh
time,
milk.
during the latter part, they had brown bottles, and it was called Golden Guernsey.
Guernsey.
And it was I think the people that bought it actually paid a couple of pennies more than the regular Glenny milk. And then eventually when they put in pasteurization, that's when they closed the milk house at Edwards Farm, because they would have had to put in a whole pasteurizing plant, and it would have cost a huge amount of money. So what they decided to do was just take the milk and sell it to Glenny. And Glenny advertised it as Golden Guernsey Edwards Farm milk for quite a while.
Wow.
And of course all of the farmers, Smolax and Kittredge's and Earl Foster, George Ray, Sid Ray, they all sold their milk to Glenny's. That's when Charlie Glenny gave up the farm and went into the production end of it, and he collected all the milk from these people. And people don't realize, most people in town I don't think realize that the Barker Farm, and I've heard two stories. I've heard that it's the oldest continual running farm in the United States of America, and then somebody has said, no, it's the second oldest. And no, I'm not sure whether it's the oldest or the second oldest, but if you never met George Barker, then you have missed out on missing one of the finest men that I've ever known is George Barker. Get up every morning, went out and milked his herd, and was such a caretaker of the property. The property has been in his family since the creation of this country, as it has been for the Farnham family. And if you hadn't met George Ray and Sid Ray and Gilly Ray and the Smolax and Earl Foster and the rest of the farmers in North Andover, you missed out on a lot, because they would always help each other. Always, if somebody was sick or if somebody needed a hand haying, the other farmers were always willing and able to help and chip in and take care of these people. They worked together for years and years, and they were a wonderful, wonderful group of people. Really wonderful.
I love that. Let's take just a short break.